do with this last pretty much 35, 40 minutes is have an informal, kind of formal discussion just to wrap up the conference and then have a lovely community conversation amongst us all. So before we just have our general discussion, so any kind of questions that you might have about the conference, about the sector, about anything in general, I'm going to ask each of our panellists up here just to say a few words about how they felt the conference went, if they've got anything in particular they took away from it, or anything else they want to say. You should know their faces by now. Paul Rowland, Executive Director of ASHE. Ari Talon, he's our student guru and activist. And Delwyn Langdon, Miss Green Gown Awards, Australasia.
I need a tiara.
You do next year, we're getting you one. So I'm going to start with Paul and give him just a few minutes just to give an overview of his thoughts so far. Thanks, Paul.
Thanks, Leanne. Before I start, I do want to just say thank you so much for asking me to come join you for the last few days. It's been wonderful hanging out with you and listening to you and hearing what's going on at your institutions and what's of interest to you. And you're a very hospitable group, and I felt very welcomed throughout it. And I just want you to know that I really appreciate this opportunity to be here with you. It has been a good learning experience for me. I've been impressed, I think, by more than anything else, the energy and the passion that you bring to this conference. Leanne keeps telling me, oh yeah, you've got that big conference over there on the other side of the ocean, but we've got the high quality one. And you're absolutely right, Leanne. You do. No, I mean, we do have a big conference, and there is actually quite a bit of criticism among our members about the size of our conference having gotten so big that it's lost the intimacy that you have here at this conference. And I want to commend you on the level of networking that you're doing constantly, whether you're in a session, out of a session, between sessions, or where there's actually the label of networking. And sometimes you network by phone with people who aren't even here. But I think that's one of the things that's impressed me a lot about this. And I think that's something that is important to remember, is that yes, there are the formal sessions, there's the keynotes, there's the VC address and so forth. But probably the most important thing you have in this meeting is an opportunity to talk with each other and communicate with each other about things that matter to you, and in ways you can't do when you're spread around the country. I will say I was interviewed for a video shot the other day and asked what was the most impressive thing about the conference. I am very impressed with the VC addresses. We don't have anything like that at our conference. We get these little statements that go into our program from the presidents, typically, of our host institutions. But in listening to the VC addresses, I'm surprised, actually, pleased, when I say surprised, but pleasantly surprised to see that you actually have vice chancellors and deputy vice chancellors who get sustainability. I mean, they really do get it. They may not be doing everything you expect them to do or want them to do, but you've got a handful, at least, that I've seen that get it. And I think that's quite impressive, and I think that means that there are doors that are opened a bit that I haven't seen much of in the U.S. So just wanted to pass that on to you. They not only do they get it, but they also get to stand in front of you and be appreciated for getting it. And I think that's important. A few of the themes that I picked up on during the concurrent sessions that I thought were significant, mostly because they're very similar to the themes and discussions that we have at our conference and in many of our workshops. Quite a few sessions on teaching and learning. I was pleased to see that some of it's gone beyond kind of what we see a lot at our conference are, here's what I do in my class, or here's what I did with somebody else in their class, and that kind of thing. More of the what we've done. And much of what I saw here was beyond that to talking about either some reflection or analysis or actual research being done on some of these things. So I wanted to point out that we are just starting to think about what that research might look like, particularly in the area of education for sustainability or sustainability teaching and learning. Big issue that we have is probably the single largest category in which we receive submissions is energy, and of course you had a number of energy related things, and obviously energy relates to climate change, relates to a pretty urgent issue that we're trying to address. So I think that's both natural and important to continue those kinds of conversations. I also noted that there are a lot of conversations now that are talking not just about technological changes, but behavioral changes, making that connection that some of those technological changes aren't going anywhere without some behavioral changes. I've got a long list here. I'm going to mention one more item. I was pleased to hear the conversations frequently bring up the words risk management and adaptation. We are way behind you in that area. We have trouble getting people to talk about adaptation. We're so enthralled with our efforts at mitigation that we think we're somehow not going to have to deal with the adaptation. Meanwhile, and this is a personal story, a year ago, major storms in the northeast of the United States, floods in areas that had never been flooded in recorded history, and indeed my sister lost her house in a flood that came down through the Susquehanna River. And you know, that does make believers out of deniers. I don't have to have conversations with them. I just have to let the floods convince them that there's something real going on out there. But it was a good, it's good to hear that there are people now talking about adaptation, and they're looking at it from a risk management standpoint and getting at what I think are critical pressure points within higher education organizations. Lots of other really good things going on here, talking about communities of practice, transportation and the community interface. I think, and this is sort of a nod to Ned's comments yesterday, you have high expectations. That's a very good thing. But you also have very high barriers to meet those expectations. So understand that, and I just want you to know that I have enjoyed the conversation, I've enjoyed listening to you talk about what you're doing, and Godspeed.
Ari, can we hand on to you to say a few words, please?
Yeah, no worries. Thanks, everyone. I've enjoyed my time here immensely, and it's been really amazing to see all the energy and inspiration that you all have for your work, and all the fantastic stuff that you're doing. Yeah, just a few different notes and ideas from a student's perspective, or kind of a student, and hopefully they will kind of serve some as something to take back and to think about. And I suppose the biggest thing is getting feedback from other students that you work with or you're in contact with. They're the people that have the direct experience, and I suppose that communication with them is can't be emphasised enough. It's been fantastic to see all the different diverse stakeholders brought here together. That there's a fantastic range of academics, people who work in facilities, people who work in education. So it's really good to see that practice of knowledge, and that we've also got students here as well, and that there's opportunities to involve the students in the approach that we're using, and the strategies we're trying to develop to transition our universities. In terms of connecting with students, I think there's a range of things that we can try and develop further, and it would be good to see some workshops in the future on these kind of things, how to form those relationships. I suppose identifying and developing those kind of mentoring relationships with students, I think, is really important. If you imagine when you're in high school, and one of the first things that might have made you passionate about sustainability was that geography teacher or that science teacher, and that had made such a big difference in your life. Don't think that just because it's university now, and just because you might be separated by a few more office walls than you used to be, the high school teacher is to their students, that you can't still play that role for those students that have come to university that obviously have a passion for sustainability and are looking for that inspiration, that mentor to help to guide them through their pathway. So yeah, can't emphasise that enough. That reaching out and creating events and programs that are going to get yourself and other staff in contact and connecting to students. And I suppose thinking about when I was at university and how I see other universities and the sustainability programs they run, we know how fast-paced the world is today. And you can think about the way the internet is changing how young people's minds work, that we're actually a lot more erratic, reactive thinkers because we're always on the internet, and this is actually rewiring the way our brain works. And so starting to think, okay, how can we relate to students in this new context? How can we create engagement with them that is going to be at their level of thought and what their interests are? So that means really effective online mediums. It also means being really reactive and timely and looking for opportunities and constantly being vigilant about the situations that are relevant to sustainability or relevant to your work that provide a platform to engage students. I don't know, it might be the trawler or something like that with the big issue recently, and there's an opportunity to engage a certain part of the university, to engage a whole bunch of students that are interested in that. It's topical, it's now, and that ability to react quickly, I think, is a fantastic way to involve students and get more people involved and get more people into the sphere of thought about how we can transition the universities. I think a key kind of challenge, and this is not just for university sustainability, but the whole sustainability sector, is the literal meaning of the word sustainability, that it's lost a lot of its meaning. It's been hacked about and thrown around ever since the Brundtland report, and for the last 20 years it's slowly been applied further and further until now you won't read a newspaper article that talks about economics, nothing to do with the environment, and it's talking economic sustainability, because it just wants to chuck that word in there to make people feel like everything's okay. And a lot of students are pretty cynical of this. So it's, and that, as I was mentioning yesterday, one of the biggest barriers to engaging students is getting past that cynicism, because they can see the world starting to come down around the sides, and they know there's a problem, but it just looks too big. So finding ways to give sustainability new meaning, whether that be through a literal interpretation by applying new words and new connotations and applying it in those different situations, and also really thinking about how, through doing your programs and your work, you're transforming your university's different constituencies' perceptions of what sustainability means. Are we actually taking them from one perception to another? They're the main thoughts. I think in future it'd be great to get the university vice-chancellors that are involved in somehow engaging with the conference in a more collaborative way. It's really fantastic that we do have those vice-chancellors, like you said, that are aware and are actually doing things. But for them to understand the challenges that we face, I feel like we need more dialogue, and that would be a really great opportunity to see how we can create that into the future. And really excited to see what ACTS does over the next year, and what all your goals and strategies are for the future, and how this great organisation can move from strength to strength, and hopefully try and get some runs on the scoreboard in terms of sustainability policy, and getting the government to better support the fantastic work that you all do. Thank you.
Beautiful Dylan, can you go next, please?
Okay, I'm going to be really brief because I'm not used to being up here.
That's why I dragged you up.
That's right. I've been involved in ACT since 2004, pretty much in the same capacity as I am now. And we had the first conference that I was involved in at the Eco Centre. We had about 40 people. So my message today is about my observations, I suppose, based on the past and then what I've experienced over the last 3 days. So whilst I've been very engaged in the actual planning of it, I've also been sitting back and observing you all. Yes, I have been taking notice. And the one thing that, and there are a lot of, as you can appreciate, a lot of planning does go into it, and even though some organisations measure their success of a conference based on their numbers, I actually like to measure the success of a conference based on the impact that the conference has had to those people that are attending, and what actually has come out of it, and those relationship building and those capacities. So over the last 3 days, I think this actually came to me about 1:30 last night, walking home from the night out with Danielle and Carleen and Lisa, thinking about what I had to talk about. And the one thing I realised is that we actually are a community. You know, my past life was an event manager, so I have managed and organised lots of conferences in the past. And what I have here is, what we have here is a real community, a community that's based on people that have like-minded agendas and goals. We work in universities and TAFE. We're working in the same area. But what we've actually built is actually almost like a pseudo-family in a sense. Some of us, we've been together for a long time over the years, and then each year we start bringing more people into the fold, and the family is getting bigger and bigger. And because we have that sense of community, and we've not only become work peers, but we've also become friends, it's given us a strength that I don't think a lot of organisations have, or they don't experience at that level. And from that, you know, there's so many opportunities to leverage as a collective, and have a voice and a strength that is only just going to get stronger and stronger as sustainability becomes more core business to organisations and institutions. So I think what we need to do, and another thing also is too, is a lot of people actually work in jobs that they might be the only person in the sustainability role, or they might be a very small team, or they might work for an university that has a large team. But particularly those ones that they tend to be a little bit left on their lonesome, or it's a very hard challenge for them within their own environment, their own institution, come to a conference like this and they don't feel like they're alone anymore. And it recharges their batteries, and it recharges that enthusiasm, and almost gets past those hurdles that they may have had that have impacted on their ability to sort of go, I suppose, stay motivated and keep being mobilised. So I'm just going to end it with that it's an honour to always be part of this conference. You are part of my family. You know how excited I get with these events, and I feel like that every year I catch up with new old friends, but every year I also make new friends as well. And we need to remember that we are here not just in representing our institutions, but we're actually part of a bigger picture, and we do it together. And it's my
You've heard enough from me over the past few days. I do just want to say a couple of things. It was interesting, the words that were used by the three panellists, things like intimacy, conversations, opportunities, reaching out, involvement, community transformation, and leveraging a collective. And I think that would be my takeaway as well, is that often you do feel alone. Often you do feel that you're not progressing, and you are hitting your head against a brick wall. I'm lucky. I'm surrounded by a really good team. I know everybody's not. And I think if you can remember this feeling that you have when you come to this conference and you sit and talk with like-minded people, and you do get energised, and you start to get that reinvigoration of why you're doing what you're doing, take that with you and utilise it in your regions as well. So come together every now and then. It may only be every quarter, but make sure you don't get so caught up in the day-to-day that you forget you have others around you that you can learn from, that you can share with, that you can go to find out how to deal with something that you're trying to deal with, because undoubtedly someone else is trying to deal with the same issues as you. So use each other as a support base. I think, Paul said to me a number of times, he can't believe how enthusiastic we are as a community, like Dal said. So don't lose that. Don't lose this feeling that you have of being together. Take it back with you and make sure you encompass that at the regional level. I honestly hope that you do get the most out of our conference. I know we work hard to make sure you do. So we will send out evaluation forms, of course, because we want to make sure we keep growing it and improving it. So take the time to fill that out. What I'd like to do now is just open to the floor. If there's any questions you have, doesn't matter what about, even if you're wondering what's for lunch, I don't care. Let's start having. I only say that because I'm always thinking about food. But if there's anything you want to ask of each other, of the panelists here, let's take this opportunity to have an open conversation before we do go and eat. So, has anyone got anything, any comments, any feedback, any questions that they'd like to throw out there? Kirsty.
You were talking about coming together as regions, and we haven't in our region yet, and I totally get that. And we're probably so disparate compared to the other regions. It's very different. But I'm really interested to know what other regions have come together and on what basis and in what regularity. So, because I find that I'm from what Jill said about being an individual who craves this conference, and I'm really, really stoked if I have something in between conferences. Even if it's a one-off, I just want to know what others are doing and how it's working.
You want to talk about Brisbane?
Yeah, I mean, I think the idea of the regional get-togethers was probably about a year and a half ago, and some of the regions, like in Brisbane, Queensland, we've had one. So, and I know the Sydney Basin have had a couple, and Victoria and Western Australia have one. What we discussed at the Strategic Planning Day was the necessity to have more events. But obviously, geographically, it's hard because in southeast Queensland it's a lot easier because we have them, within an hour and a half, 2 hours with each other. But like you said, Kirsty, you're a little bit more isolated. It's about embracing technology. So we've got to look at not only the face-to-face and maybe work out how we can do that maybe once or twice a year, which is more realistic, but how do we embrace technology and use the webinars and those sort of mechanisms to put on the regional events. The ones that we actually have had, I've only had one in Brisbane. It was a great event. It was a little while ago, and we had Alicia and Dave from our USQ, we had Sunshine Coast, we had UQ Griffiths. We got together for an hour and a half, 2 hours over lunch, talked about what each of us were doing, but we all walked away with a similar feeling that you have in a smaller scale like you have at the conference. I can't answer for Sydney, obviously, Victoria and Western Australia, but I know that from the feedback they are being successful. But the one thing is that we realise that some people are geographically disadvantaged, challenged. So that's all about, how do we embrace technology and develop a program so that is that collectiveness without having to bring everybody in from all over the mile, so to speak. So I don't know if that answers your question.
I obviously can speak from the Sydney Collective, and I noticed a few people here that went to our last one. So Seb, sitting in the middle there, he hosted the last get-together at the regional level for us. So we all went to UTS. We had really good representation from our members. We've got a fairly high membership in the Sydney region. And we did a format where each institution was given 10 minutes to discuss a thing or a number of things, and if they wanted to share something they could. If they had a challenge they wanted to get feedback on, they could do that. And we were very strict on time. Seb had his little clock out and we had to make sure we were all within that 10 minutes. But it provided us an opportunity to share what was going on and again get reinvigorated, and Axe put on the lunch for the day. I know I always find it useful when we get together as a Sydney Basin, and we try and do it 3 times a year. So I don't know if any of my other colleagues from the Sydney area want to add to it, but it's really good fun just to come and meet each other and get refreshed and reinvigorated. So.
And just to add to that, one of the things that we decided to do was to actually lock in a whole year's meeting, so that we've actually now got the dates and the venues, the unis that are hosting those for the next 12 months. And so one strategy perhaps for trying to reach out to those areas that are a little bit more geographically challenged is for us to maybe even put those dates and places on the public website, so that if people, particularly in regional New South Wales, for example, are coming to Sydney, then of course they'd be really welcome to maybe join in. Yeah.
Also at the last meeting we had like the one-page update as well, that was like a takeaway that was then distributed electronically, I think. Yeah, so I think that was useful as well in terms of anything that you didn't get to fit into your 10 minutes. You could, see what other people were doing and then get in contact with them.
Yeah.
I wonder if we could just answer it. And do you want to say what we're doing in New Zealand?
Yeah, so for about... Sorry.
Run, Marie, run.
We're in New Zealand. We're all quite geographically spread out as well, and lots of us are just the one of us in the role. So we've, for maybe a year or so, something like that, we have monthly webcast get-togethers now where it's a pretty informal structure. We started out having proper topics and agendas and all that kind of stuff, and that's kind of gone by the by now. We just get together and have a chat. But yeah, it's working really well. And so, like, this conference now is the first time we've actually, for most of us, have seen each other in the flesh. But it's, I don't know, it's fostered a real sense of collaboration for us and shared the issues. And
People do a team, I mean, it's amazing. It hasn't fallen off. We're getting more people coming. So we've got about 9, you know, I mean, it's been regular.
yeah, it's probably.
Yeah, so it's fantastic. It's a great opportunity to face-to-face rooms.
Belinda, I saw you had your hand
I
up.
was just going to talk about the model that we have in Victoria, and is it the Tertiary Sustainability Network, we've called ourselves, and we get together 4 times a year. We set the dates at the beginning of the year, and I think it's the first Tuesday of the month of that quarter that we choose. We open it to TAFEs and universities. Whoever the host is, they have to be quite close to the CBD. That's one of the criterion. And if you host, you invite people, so that email list gets passed on to the next host, which is planned at the previous meeting. They put on a lunch. They, give us a room for 2 hours. We go around. We talk about what everyone else is doing. It's open to anyone in Victoria, and every now and then, like last time, we had a special themed meeting and we invited our procurement teams and our procurement managers in, and we invited speakers from EcoBuy and other areas that could help us with our sustainable procurement. But most of the time, it's just us supporting each other and hearing about what we do. So we're about to plan, I guess, our next 4 in Victoria, and that's our model.
Thanks, Belinda. Does anyone else have any comments or questions? Leslie.
Sorry, I just got a little one. If you wouldn't mind, it's just to help me with my emails. I've got a bunch of little books that I brought with me from New Zealand. They're written by Nikki Harry, who's one of our academics in psychology. She wins awards for being a fantastic teacher all the time. She's written this little book, Psychology for a Better World, and it's basically, it picks up on 3 fundamental principles that help us to make our work easier. That people are happiness seekers, people are social, and people want to do good. And she basically, in a very, very light way, explains how you basically go about doing that, so worksheets and things. I have a number of copies. I really don't want to have to drag them back to New Zealand. So I've got some people who've put their names down. All you need to do is come and give me your name. She's charging $15 for them, which is really basic, covers the printing. And you just give me your name. You give me your name and contact details. I give you a book, and she will contact you just with payment details. And it's it's an honesty box approach. But thank you for giving me the opportunity to just do the plug. It's a fantastic little book. There is actually also a YouTube video, if you Google it, Psychology for a Better World, that has her actually talking about what it's about. So that's my little plug. I will be here. I do have them in a little box if anybody wants one.
And no, you're not getting any commission, are you, Leslie?
Nothing. So if you do, we actually give them to students as prizes and things. They're really great. So thank you. I will be here.
Any other questions or comments? Colin.
This came up a couple of times during this conference, and it's the broader issue around where we're headed with climate change and sustainability, etc. So, and I'll be interested in your response to this, Paul, in terms of ASHE and what you might be thinking about. So somewhere soon down the line, there's going to be another layer of effects, and ACS is in a sense the tertiary voice for sustainability. So somewhere along the line, some of us somewhere are going to need to give responses to these things, and also they're going to relate to the urgency of what's required, etc. So I'm just wondering whether ASHE has thought through that at any other level, and also maybe raising the question about ACTS starting to think through what we might do, because if there's another round of bushfires or floods or whatever, and people start saying, well, this is examples of the sort of thing we're talking about, then we probably need to be thinking through what our response is going to be.
Just a couple of thoughts that come to mind when you raise those issues, which are, I think, the huge challenge that we face on a daily basis, trying to figure out where we're headed. Within ASHE, I think one of the things that we've tried to do is go through a fairly significant transition in the past year of thinking of ourselves as just kind of a collector and a node for exchanging information, to actually taking on a role more as a thought leader. And that's an important challenge for an organization, because that means you have to sift through and start making some value decisions about what counts. And that also means that you end up providing in some way preference for some views and bring to the fore certain views and certain viewpoints. And so I say this with a bit of trepidation, but I think it's very important that organizations do move into that realm of actually trying to provide that kind of leadership. Higher education, tertiary education, is full of a lot of really bright, intelligent, hardworking people. And that's the resource that we draw on for that. The other side of higher education is that it typically, at least in the United States, is a huge bureaucracy that moves very slowly and changes relatively slowly. And so kind of balancing that issue of urgency with the bureaucratic morass that you see in higher education, I think, has been a big challenge for us. How do we get the leadership of organizations, just as we talked about yesterday, how do you get the leadership of organizations to actually start moving? But also, how do you deal with that big middle mass? And we're pretty sure we've got a lot of the early adapters in ASHE on board. And we have really robust conversations, and we can talk about how we deal with things in terms of urgency and so forth. But the truth of the matter is that there's a huge, about half of the higher education community out there that we don't touch at all. It's actually much larger than that in some ways, but in our best days, we still have to say we're working with a small quarter of that enterprise. The problem, I think, is that we have a lot of trouble having these conversations outside of the comfortable bodies like this. And I think the challenge that we're facing, and the challenge that you'll face too, is moving that conversation out to the middle. And getting the middle engaged in the conversation about sustainability. It's not that they don't want it. I mean, I actually have never met anyone, even my favorite oil men, who are against sustainability. They're just not for it because they don't know what it is. And part of, I think, the challenge we face worldwide is creating a vision for the future. And articulating that vision in a way that shows it's attractive, and then tying the decision-making and the consequences of the decision-making to either achieving that future or failing to achieve that future. For me, the daily horror I have is that we haven't helped people make those connections. And I think it is about connectedness. Connectedness not just with each other, but connectedness of ideas, connectedness of consequences. All of that, I think, is going to be the important part. That brings me back then to, so what's supposed to be happening in higher education to get us there? Well, higher education prepares virtually in our country all the professionals that make major decisions about what society is going to be doing and how it's going to be behaving. That means higher education ought to take some responsibility for it. I'm not saying higher education is this monolithic force that actually can shape everything, but I think it is a critical force in shaping our futures. I think it should be a critical force in shaping our futures. I think it sometimes is much too passive. How do we get there? I think we get there by having lots and lots of somewhat uncomfortable conversations on our campuses with our peers, whether they're in operations or in the academic side, work in between in administration, wherever they are, they need to be engaged in that conversation. And if you think about how many people you interact with in a given day, how many times do you use the word sustainability with them? If you're in a sustainability position, you probably use it a lot, but most people don't. And that's where the growth has to come from. And I think that's the way the momentum's going to get built. I will say, we are still, in the scope of kind of movements, we're still a pretty early and small movement. There's a lot of maturing to be done, and I think that that's how organizations like ASHE and ACTS and EAUC and all of our other international partners, I think that's where we can play a role, is helping to mature that conversation and to help you, support you in developing ways to grow the conversation on your campuses. I think that's the most important thing we can do.